Hello, my name is Bernardo DV2 and I am here to start the report of Group 7 on Chapter 15 Evaluation Studies from Controlled to Natural Settings. Now, let's talk about usability settings. First, it must involve recording performance of typical users doing the typical tasks. On a control setting, users are observed and timed, data is recorded on video, and key presses are logged. The data is then used to calculate performance time and to identify and explain errors. User satisfaction is evaluated using questionnaires and interviews. Lastly, field observation may be used to provide contextual understanding. Now, let's move on to usability lab with observers watching a user and assistant. There are several things used in the experiment to see how users behave. One of which is Tobii Glass's mobile eye tracking system, which allows the facilitators to see what the user is looking at. Next, we have portable equipment for use in the field. These are portable gadgets that can easily be stored and be brought to different sites of experiment. As you can see in this picture, they have a camera setup directly pointing at an iPad, which is directly connected to several laptops for several facilitators to observe at the same time. A place to put the device that they are tasting, and the iPad itself.
In the first study of iPad usability, Rollo Cabello and Jacob Nielsen used two usability evaluation methods. Usability testing with think aloud in which users said what they were doing and thinking as they did it, and an expert review. A key question they asked was about whether user expectations were different for the iPad as compared to the iPhone. They focused on this issue because a previous study of the iPhone showed that people preferred using apps to browsing the web because the latter was slow and cumbersome at that time. They wondered whether this would be the same for the iPad, where the screen was larger and web pages were more similar to how they appear on the laptops or desktop computers that most people were accustomed to using at the time. The usability testing was carried out in two cities in the United States, Fremont, California, and Chicago, Illinois. The test sessions were similar. The goal of both was to understand the typical usability issues that users encounter when using application and accessing websites on the iPad. Seven participants were recruited. All were experienced iPhone users who had owned their phones for at least 3 months and who had used a variety of apps. One reason for selecting participants who used iPhones was because they would have had previous experience in using apps and the web with the similar interaction styles as the iPad. The participants were considered to be typical users who represented the range of those who might purchase an iPad. Two participants were in their 20s, three were in their 30s, one was in their 50s, and one was in their 60s. Three were males and four were females. Before taking part, the participants were asked to read and sign an informed consent form agreeing to the term and conditions of the study. This form described the following: what the participant would be asked to do, the length of time needed for the study, the compensation that will be offered for participating in the study, the participant's right to withdraw from the study at any time, a promise that the person's identity will not be disclosed, an agreement that the data collected from each participant would be confidential and would not be made available to marketers or anyone other than the researchers. The session started with participants being invited to explore any application they found interesting on the iPad. They were asked to comment on what they were looking for or reading, what they like and dislike about a site, and what made it easy or difficult for them to carry out a task. A moderator sat next to each participant, observed, and took notes. The sessions were video recorded and they lasted about 90 minutes each. Participants worked on their own. After exploring the iPad, the participants were asked by the researchers to open specific apps or websites, explore them, and then carry out one or more tasks as they would have if they were on their own. Each participant was assigned to the task in a random order. All of the apps that were tested were designed specifically for the iPad, but for some tasks, the users were asked to do the same task on a website that was not specifically designed for the iPad. For this task, the researchers took care to balance the presentation order so that the app would be the first presented for some participants and the website would be first presented for others. More, no, more than 60 tasks were chosen from the 13 different sites. Examples of the tasks used in the iPad evaluation: Apple website and then the task. iBook: download the free copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and read throughout the first few pages. Craigslist: find some free mulch for your garden. eBay. You want to buy a new iPad on eBay? Find one that you could buy from a reputable seller. Time Magazine. Browse through the magazine and find the best picture of the week. Epicurus. You want to make an apple pie for tonight? Find a recipe and see what you need to buy in order to prepare it. Kayak. You are planning a trip to Death Valley in May this year. Find a hotel located in a park or close to the park. The main findings from the study showed that the participants were able to interact with websites on the iPad but that it was not optimal. For example, links on the pages were often too small to tap on reliably, and the fonts were sometimes difficult to read. The various usability problems identified in the study were classified according to a number of well-known interaction design principles and concepts, including mental models, navigations, quality of images, problems of using a touchscreen with small target areas, lack of affordance, getting lost in the application, effects of changing orientation, working memory, and feedback received. Getting lost in an application is an old but important problem for designers of digital products, and some participants got lost because they tapped the iPad too much and could not find a back button and could not get back to the homepage. One participant said, "I like having everything there. That's just how my brain works." Other problems arose because applications appear differently in the two views possible on the iPad, portrait and landscape. Based on the findings of their study, Buju and Nielsen made a number of recommendations, including supporting standard navigation. The results of the study were written up as a report that was made publicly available to app developers and the general public. It provided a summary of key findings for the general public as well as specific details of the problems that the participants had with the iPad so the developers could decide whether to make specific websites and apps for the iPad. While revealing how usable websites and apps are on the iPad, this user testing did not address how the iPad will be used in people's everyday lives. This required a field study where observations were made of how people use iPads in their own homes, at school, in the gym, and when traveling. But this didn't happen because of lack of time.
Usability test condition. Usability lab or other controlled space. Emphasis on selecting representative users. Developing representative tasks. 5 to 10 users typically selected. Task usually around 30 minutes. Test conditions are the same for every participant. Informed consent form explain procedures and deals with ethical issues. Participants is enough for user testing. The number is a practical issue. Depends on schedule for testing, availability of participants, cost of running tests, typically 5 to 10 participants. Some experts argue that testing should be continued until no new insight are gained.
What is usability testing and experiments? Usability testing is applied experimentation. Developers check that the system is usable by the intended user population by collecting data about participants' performance on prescribed tasks. Experiments test hypotheses to discover new knowledge by investigating the relationship between two or more variables. What is the difference of usability testing and research? Usability testing is to improve products by a few participants, and results are in informed design, and usually not completely replicable, conditions controlled as much as possible, and procedures planned, and the results are reported to developers. While experiments for research is to discover knowledge by many participants, and results are validated statistically, must be replicable and strongly controlled conditions. It has experimental design and scientific report to scientific community. What is experiments? Experiments is to test hypotheses to predict the relationship between two or more variables. The independent variable is manipulated by the researcher, while the dependent variable is influenced by the independent variable. It has typical experimental designs that have one or two independent variables. It is validated statistically and replicable.
Different same match participant design. So the advantage of disadvantage of this participant design is the first one is the different. The advantage is no order effects, while the same is few individuals, no individual differences, and also match same as different participants but individual differences reduced. So disadvantages of this design is, the first one is the different. Many subjects and individual differences a problem. So the next one is same disadvantages is counterbalancing needed because of ordering effects. And while the match disadvantages is cannot be sure of perfect matching on all differences. Field studies. So field studies are done in natural settings. A term for prototypes being used really in natural settings is called in the wild. So seek to understand what users do naturally and how technology impacts them. And field studies are used in product design too. First one is identify opportunities for new technology. Second is determine design requirements. The third one is decide how best to introduce new technology. And the last is evaluate technology in use. A field study of a pain monitoring device. So, monitoring patients' pain is a known challenge for physicians. So, goal of the study was to evaluate the use of a pain monitoring device for use after ambulatory surgery. So, the pain pad is like a KIPA device. It was usability tested extensively in the lab before brought into 2 hospitals. So the goal was to understand how pain pad was used in the natural environment and as part of routines in 2 UK hospitals. And the question is how pain monitoring differed with pain pad.
What is a pain pad? The pain pad device is a handheld tool that enables self-logging of pain in a manner that is robust and easy to use. Evidence of improved rates of compliance, frequency, and accuracy of pain scoring from patients using pain pad in a hospital recovery setting. Now, in data collection, 2 studies in 2 different hospitals which involves 13 males and 41 females, in which each privacy of participants were concealed for their important concerns. The patients were given pain pad after each surgery and have been told to report pain levels that they would feel every 2 hours. Nurses also collected scores from each participant and were placed their response into charts. And patients in one hospital were given a user satisfaction survey in which they would rate the usability of the pain pad on the basis of 1 is the lowest and 5 is the highest in a manner of Likert scale. Now, let us talk into the data analysis. 3 types of data were collected, which are the following. Number 1 is satisfaction with the pain pad were based on the questionnaire responses, in which they give a set of questionnaires for every patient to base and to rate on how are they satisfied in using a pain pad. Second one is the patient's compliance within the 2-hour routine, in which that they told in every 2 hours after the surgery, they would rate in the their pain levels or report it by the use of the pain pad. Lastly, how data collected from pain pad compared with the data collected by nurses. The data collected from the pain pad is compared into the data collected by the nurses separately in each patient. Data showed that on the Likert scale, the satisfaction score of the pain pad was 4.63. The compliance of patients were mixed, in which some of the patients liked the function of the pain pad, while others disliked or did not notice the prompts of the pain pad. Patients recorded more scores with the pain pad than through the nurses, in which that patients enjoyed the use of pain pad than through interviewing with the nurses. Now, for the summary of chapter 15. Usability testing takes place in a controlled usability labs or temporary labs. It focuses on performance measures, for example, how long and how many errors are made when completing a set of predefined tasks. Also, indirect observations were made in which the satisfaction of the user and interviews are also collected. Many usability testing also contains mobile eye tracking and other devices. The experimenters test a hypothesis by manipulating certain variables while keeping others inconstant. Field studies are evaluation studies that were carried out in natural settings to discover how people would interact with technology in the real world. And sometimes the findings of a field study were unexpected, especially for the wild studies that explore how novel technologies are used by participants in their own homes or in their workplace. And that would be all for the chapter 15. Thank you for watching.